Jasmine, and welcome to the Southwest Grief Corner. Yet again, we are here located at 7901 South Kaminsky. This is located in Chicago, Illinois, on the southwest side of Chicago, across from Bogan High School. Again, we are located at 7901 South Kaminsky in Chicago, Illinois, on the southwest side of Chicago. Our telephone number here is 773-424-3151. Again, our telephone number here is 773-424-3151. Our website is www.southwestfunerallandcremation.com. Again, our website here is southwestfunerallandcremation.com, and we have a bunch of resources there available for you guys, most specifically because this is the Grief Corner. Under our grief support tab, many resources available and published for the Grief Corner. You can find those and share those there, as well as our YouTube channel, which is Southwest Funeral One, and also, of course, on our Facebook page, which is Southwest Memorial Chapel and Life Plan Solutions. So we do want to welcome you all back yet again to the Grief Corner, where we come here to discuss various grief topics. The Grief Corner was established as a place where you all can get support as you're dealing with whatever the ails are that beset you because of losses. Sometimes those losses are because of things in life like jobs or homes, situational changes, maybe children are going away to college and you become an empty nester. All of these things bring about some portion of grief when we're looking at a change in our lives. But mostly we know that death does bring grief. So when we come here, we try to help you guys deal with grief as it pertains to the bigger spectrum, including the smaller things which are transitional but still cause you different emotions. So today we're talking, and we're coming back on the grief segment that we started for men and grief. We did session 1 with Linda 2 weeks ago. Linda Clark, she's a mental health counselor out of Virginia Beach, Virginia. She's out there working for this within the facilities trying to help. And so she gave of us her time to help us to understand and to expound on men and grief. And so as a caveat to that, what seemed only natural is that we do a part 2. Because Linda, she has the experience. Linda, she has the counseling methods, etc. But Linda's not a man. And so I thought what would be interesting, no, I don't want you to leave, Shay. This is for men and women. What I think is a good point to insert here is that we have women and men in this earth, and women are oftentimes trying to help the men. Women are the rib of the man, and so we have husbands, we have mates, we have brothers, we have fathers, we have men that maybe we work with, we have cousins, we have nephews, especially if you're in the school system or work with children, even in the church. We have young men in the schools, obviously. We have young men in the church, and so that it's compartmentalized for the men, but to understand that it's also for the women, because most times women are not quite sure how to help the men because we're women. And so that's why this is all inclusive, because when it comes to how do we as women help men, most of the times we don't know, which help us, the women, to understand how you can be a bridge for a man who's grieved. And this is critical because even Bishop and I, we spoke to earlier this week, and I was saying to him that this is particularly useful for women because of that reason. The world, they say that women outnumber men. So therefore, we already know if you're talking about 2 men or 2 women to 1 man, or whatever, then how do we help them? And then even men that are incarcerated and things like that, they're grieved too. So how can you, the women that are even on the outside, how can you help those men who are dealing with grief situations, even incarcerated? So this is definitely for everyone, and I want you all to take this information, whether you hear it today or whether you hear this a week from now. These videos are published, we do it, and that's why we still go forward no matter who's on, because once we publish it and we put it in the air, it's in the air, and it's to be shared for as ever long as people can get to it. And so we want women to understand that this is for you so that you can help the men in your lives. I was talking to a man earlier today, this week, and he said that the best thing that a woman can do for him is act normal. Just be yourself. And sometimes we don't even know that, or whatever. And I said, well, even something so simple as, well, just be yourself, be normal. Don't walk on eggshells around me. Don't feel like you need to not be normal. But I said to him, I said, most women don't even know that, because there are not many times where men will share with you what you can do to help them when they're down, what you can do to help them when they suffer loss, what you can do to help them, as sometimes they're always trying to be, the provider. They're always trying to be the testosterone builder and the strong point, whatever. But what do you do to help them when they're down? So definitely it's for the women, and we want to equip the women on how to help the men, because if we can help the men, then we can be good stewards to help them as they're dealing with the things that they have to deal with. So definitely, women, as you're coming in, please stay with us, okay? I do, without prolonging the time, because I'm very excited and Bishop is a very busy man, do want to introduce him and say that here we are, Bishop Trout. Thank you so much for joining us. This is a 2-for-1, and he's joining from both the camera on his live and as well on our Zoom. So Bishop, thank you so much for joining us. He is out in California now. I said, well, 6 o'clock Eastern, and I kept pushing that time out there so that people who are East would know that it's 6 p.m. Eastern. And when I spoke to Bishop today and he told me he was in California, I said, oh, wow. Okay, so it's 3 o'clock his time. So we're all on different time zones. I'm just grateful that he took the time to be here to help us. Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you, Tyra. Thanks for the invitation.
And there's so much that I can. Oh, absolutely. Thank you for accepting, because I do know that you're busy. Yeah, absolutely. So for all that he is, I'm just going to connect you to mine as well. Okay, so for all that Bishop Trout does do, I've known him since 2011, and he actually was my pastor at Harvest Time in Riverdale, Georgia, while I lived in Atlanta. And under him, I attained great growth spiritually and as well, just as a woman, as a mother, as a Christian. And so when we talk about death care and we do grief counseling and things like that, we're always dealing with counselors. I deal with therapists, I deal with psychologists and psychiatrists. But one thing about, depending on what you believe and who you believe, a lot of times your grief support comes from your spiritual connection. So I thought it would be a great time not only to bring in a man to talk to us, to help us with time, to bring it from also at a spiritual perspective, because for some people, they are healing based off of their connection with their higher power. And so I think that it's great to involve both. And so Bishop Trout, and this time that I've known him, one thing that I advertised out to you guys, he's from California by way of Columbus, Ohio. He's very well traveled and very well educated and taught, not just in the matters that are spiritual, but also political. Also, he's working and has worked in the mortuary side of things and dealt with funeral homes, worked very closely with funeral homes, done a lot of counseling and things of that nature. So he's more than qualified to deliver what it is that we need. I can talk about him forever because he is that awesome, and I'm grateful for the relationship. I'm grateful to know him. I'm grateful that he's taken the time to join us tonight. And so, without belaboring the time, I'll let him take it forward and take us where we're going to go as we go into our Men and Grief Part 2. So, thank you, Bishop, so much for being here, and I will give you the floor.
Thank you, Tyra Watson, and appreciate the opportunity to share with Southwest Funeral Home and Cremation and the great work you're doing there in Chicago. And all of you that have joined us today and in the future, I want to talk to you about men in grief and men and grief. Having worked in the field of pastoring, eulogizing, and then working directly for a funeral home, become accustomed to dealing with men over the years, dealing with the issue of grief. Now, when we talk about grief, you know, grief is something that's universal. In fact, I got some bad news today about a colleague in ministry who passed, who's very well known, Bishop Iona Locke. And so before coming here, having to encounter grief, because as you know, it is universal and it seems as if it has come closer to home this year. So I want to introduce you to this concept of grief. Number one, it's universal. And so all of us experience it. But then grief also is dealt with personally. Each one of us has our own personal filter by which we deal with grief. And that's based on our experiences growing up and the person that you're dealing with who has passed. I look at grief as a break in continuity. You know, you have this continuum with a relationship and a way of doing things, habits. We call someone, we text them, and then there's a break in that. And that's what causes the grief, is the break in continuity of relationship. So there's a universal concept to grief. All of us will experience the legacy of grief. And then there's a way that we all deal with it personally. But then there is a gender-based perspective on grief that brings us to today's subject of men and grief. So we don't want to eliminate the fact that there is a gender-based response to grief. Men grieve in a way that is different than women. And so with that in mind, it's important for us to understand how, number one, we're dealing with it just personally, and then how are we dealing with it because of the factory settings. You see, there are certain factory settings in a man that causes him to approach grief differently. What are some of those factory settings? It's important to know this, women, about men. Number one, in the factory settings, men are providers, men are protectors, men are leaders. That's a gross generalization, but it gets to the point. We are providers, we are protectors, we are leaders. So with that as our factory settings, when grief comes, it still goes through that filter of our factory settings. Hence, it determines how we grieve as men. And so you'll see a general way in which men grieve. Now, mind you, we all are unique in our approaches. But if you really want to understand your husband, your brother, your grandfather, your father, and their grieving process, understand this: do not place your grieving method upon them. So many times we will look for someone else to grieve like we are and then say that they're not in grief because they are not grieving as we are. And so I want you to understand that there is no perfect grieving method. There are better ways to grieve, but I'm going to show you, because of men's factory settings, why they grieve a certain way. So think about it this way. If a man is a provider by nature, protector by nature, and a leader, his grieving then is still going to have to go through that process. So when he's grieving, he's not going to necessarily put his guard down. Remember, he's a protector. He's a provider. So his guard many times still remains up. So here's the result. There will be walls around him emotionally. He will act as if he's in denial. He will displace his grief. He'll place it somewhere else. There will be raised activity. And he's doing all this activity, remember, because he's a protector, provider, okay, and leader. So he will displace his grief with activity. I will start doing things. Also, because in the factory settings of men, we are fixers by nature. You understand what grief has done to a man's psyche? I have for years had the responsibility of pastoring, and one of the most difficult tasks of pastoring is visiting the sick and shut-in in the hospital. And it was one of the most difficult tasks, though I did it. But it frustrated me. You want to know why? It's because I couldn't fix the situation. I could come and emote and pray and show my face, but I was at a loss many times for words, and I wanted to fix it. So understand that when a man goes through grief, he's frustrated because he can't fix it. For the first time, he's got a situation in his life that his money won't fix or handle. Because of our factory settings, there's also going to be anger, and anger will result from the fact that he can't fix it. Remember, he's provider, I'm a protector, and I'm a leader. So as a leader, I've got to show the way, I've got to lead the way, so fathers will tell the sons, quit crying, quit showing all of that emotion. Why? Because he was taught that. Be a man. So he was taught to disassociate emotions with manhood. And many times men will deal with grief by making immediate transitions. For example, to another mate. Because I'm a protector, provider, defender. I don't have anywhere to place these feelings. So I'll immediately place it in somebody else, and I'll get married in 3 months after the wife died. Or he'll do just the opposite. He'll take a vow, and because he's unable to place those emotions or tap into those emotions again, he'll put a vow in his life and say, I'll never connect with another woman again because I lost my wife and she was the only one for me. And so I don't want to go through that process of trying to redevelop emotions and the complexity of developing relationship. So he will go that route also. So understand that because of our factory settings, we're going to react a certain way. And it's because of that. Now, there are ways to deal with that, which I'm going to deal with in a moment. But don't think there's something wrong with him. Everybody's grieving and everybody's around the casket and he's sitting in the back of the room. And you're wondering why he's not up there. Because there's cognitive dissonance. This is not working with my mind right. I'm supposed to protect and defend and lead and I can't do any right now. Or he'll awkwardly come up and pat you on the back and say, it'll be all right. It'll be all right. And you're like, no, I need more than that. But it's awkward for him because he can't fix it. Women understand this. Women, have you ever come to your man and you're crying and you're broken, and when you come to him, he wants to know who, what, and where. Who did it? What happened? You know why? Because his factory setting says, fix it. And women are like, no, I don't want you to fix anything. I don't want you to give me a bunch of, I want you to hear me. I want you to hug me. I want you to hold me. And he's like, stop it. Let me fix it. Here, wipe them tears. You see, it's awkward for him because he's going into his factory setting modes. I got to fix it. And that makes the woman more frustrated. Oh, no, I don't want you to fix it. And the man's trying to, what do you mean? You're crying. Something needs to be fixed. And so there goes this clash of emotions. And so it might take 30, 40 years for the man to figure out she doesn't want you to go into man mode and fix it. So now consider him now in grief. He's now going through grief. So he's frustrated. And so the grief may manifest as anger. And he'll be short with you because I can't fix this. Woman has lost her child, her husband. She's wondering, what's wrong with him? We just lost a child. We just lost our baby. What's wrong with you? That's the ultimate slam in his face as a fixer. I'm supposed to protect my child. I couldn't even protect my child from death. And so many times, the loss of a child is responsible for many divorces. People think you lose a child and they would come together. In many cases, it drives them apart because one of them in the situation is a fixer and was supposed to fix it, and he's supposed to protect. And I couldn't even protect my child. And so the reaction to that then is he will get distant in his emotions because he feels like a failure. And I couldn't fix it. And the mom is saying, those emotions don't compute. I'm expecting you to be broken with tears and falling out over the place. And you're just the opposite. And you're coming home later and later. Where are you? I need you. And guess what? He's stopping maybe at the bar. He's sitting in his car somewhere. Why? Because I don't want to go back to the place where I'm reminded of it. And when I look into her eyes, I see her disappointment that you couldn't do it. You couldn't fix it. So men are grieving, though it doesn't appear as if he's grieving. You know, when it comes to that thing of being masculine and grieving, I'm reminded of Jesus. There's two scriptures that talk about Jesus in grief. In John 11, it says this. These are two words, John 11:35, one of the most famous scriptures ever. You know what it says? Jesus wept. When he came and heard about his friend Lazarus dying, and his sister came and cried, if you'd have just been here, he wouldn't have died. She fell down at his feet crying. The Bible said the Jews that were with her were crying. And the Bible says Jesus groaned and was troubled. And these two words, Jesus wept. So there was this immediate release of the fountain of grief. Jesus was what we would call a fully actualized human being. He was complete as a human being, emotionally, mentally. physically. He was complete. And to show how complete he wasn't afraid to cry in front of Mary and in front of these strangers about his friend. He was trying to demonstrate something to us. How do we know? Because in Isaiah 53:3, it said this, prophesying about Jesus, that he would be a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief. Now that's deep, because he was not a man that experienced sorrows. He was a man of sorrows. You saw sorrow and you saw Jesus. And acquainted with grief. Grief and Jesus were on a first name basis. But Jesus also knew how to handle grief and yet still be a full man. So for some man out there who's listening and watching, somebody put it in you that real men don't cry. And so you never saw your daddy cry. And when you tried to cry, he punched you in the chest. Little boy, you never forget that. Pow! Punch in the chest. Boy, quit crying. How many of y'all ever dealt with this? Your mom and daddy whip your behind and then tell you, stop crying. What kind of madness was that? They beat you half to death and then say, stop all that crying. And then if you didn't cry, oh, you're not going to cry now. And then try to beat you. It's a wonder we all got any sense now. Okay? But Jesus is a fully actualized man, and he displayed the tears openly, and it was prophesied of him he would be acquainted with grief. So, how do you deal with a man in grief? Let me just share with you some things that I learned over the years in dealing with men and grief. So, we know that there's a need for releasing these emotions. Tears are a way of the soul to ventilate itself, a releasing. So some men can't cry. But talking is also a way of relief. Let me just say this. When you're dealing with men and release, you know, we have a whole generation, the World War II generation. Do you know those men witnessed countless brutal deaths? And the greatest generation, we call it, do you not know that 90% of them, their families will tell you they never spoke of the grief. They went through World War II, unspeakable death, unspeakable pain, and yet when they came home, the grandkids